Hey, and welcome to the next episode of Microsoft Dev Radio. I'm your host, Jerry, and this is Darren. Hello, Mr. May.
Hey, Jerry, how's it going?
Darren, you're a developer.
I believe I am sometimes.
Have you ever developed on a team with more than one developer?
More than once.
What's the process that you're a waterfall guy?
Unfortunately, it's often Scrumiful.
Scrumifall, the mixture of Agile and waterfall.
Yes.
Waterfall is really the bad word. I mean, you would use it to really look at your peers and embarrass them in public.
I think that's how it's morphed into. Historically, that's the way companies had to do it. They had to establish a budget up front. They had to do big design. They had to commit to a timeline. They had to commit to a feature set. So there was no variability there from the approach. However, pragmatism always had to creep in because things invariably slipped. Either the budget had to increase, features had to be trimmed, and so on. There had to be a better way.
It all came from the real world, didn't it? We're building dams and space shuttles, and we just figured we could do software the same way.
Exactly, and that's sometimes the fallacy, isn't it? Software engineering is more art than craft sometimes.
Well, here's what's great. We've got Richard Hundhausen. He's an expert with all of things Agile, and he's also an expert with all of things Azure DevOps and how these things are friends with each other. It's going to be an interesting episode.
Sounds great.
That's this episode of Dev Radio. Hey, and welcome. This is Microsoft Dev Radio. I'm Jerry. This is Darren. And Richard, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, you guys. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Richard, I feel like I've known you for a dozen years. You were MVP, RD, regular guy, now Agile superstar.
Well, I wouldn't say that. And, not knowing everything there is to know about everything.
Humble, and very humble.
Yes.
Yeah. And
thank you for that.
The humblest.
Set the bar pretty high there.
That's right. You're a Scrum professional. I mean, you don't run into these guys. You get Scrum masters, but I mean, that's like
that's a course.
That's like genius bars isn't full of geniuses either, And so talk to us a little bit about who you are, Richard. I gave you a little bit, but tell us who you are.
Tell us the truth.
Well, much like Darren, my experiences with software development was waterfall. We just didn't call it waterfall. It was just the way things were done. You did these large upfront ideas and large upfront plans, and you locked in on scope and schedule and cost and hope you hit it, and you never did. So 20 odd years ago, people started realizing there was a better way to do it. Mm-hmm. So I was studying XP, Extreme Programming, back in the late 90s, and there's some good stuff here. Talk to people. How about that? So it really hit home. I was learning about something else called Scrum. I wasn't really practicing it yet. And then the guys got together in Utah, wrote up the manifesto. It made sense. And then very quickly I realized that Scrum was kind of the framework that most people adopted to try to become Agile. And that was my path as well.
Agile manifesto was written up in Utah. I didn't know that.
In Utah, yeah. Yeah, 2001.
Wow.
History.
Wow. 18 years ago. That's pretty incredible, actually. Okay, so I tend to think that when that manifesto was originally written, or maybe just the XP guys, when they did it, they were probably funded by 3M and the Post-it division, don't you think?
Definitely 3M, yes.
I mean, how many Post-its do you think Agile has sold? By the gabillion, I think is the right word.
Totally. And a quick bonus tip for you guys, when you're working with the Post-its, peel them off from the side, and that way they don't curl up, and they stick longer and better.
There you go, pro tip.
Great. Dev Radio's turned into that show.
So you're a Post-it MVP. Is that what you're telling me?
20
that's my one trick.
Tips that'll change your. Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so we have. I also want to introduce you to Stretch Armstrong. He's flexible like an Agile team.
Yeah. Hope your hand doesn't slip off when you're stretching that.
Pull it. It's as hard as you pull it. It doesn't matter.
I remember that guy.
This is old school right here.
Yeah.
This is totally old school.
That's not the Agile we mean, though.
No, that's not the Agile we mean. For people, I can't even imagine this question's coming out of my mouth. For people who don't know what you even mean when you say Agile, how is it different than waterfall? Not the way things used to be, but the way they are in other places.
Absolutely. So Agile is not really a set of practices. It's not really something you do. It's more a state of mind, a state of being that a team becomes. I always speak in terms of teams, by the way. And it means that you value talking with people, working software, responding to change, than the traditional following a plan and documentation and do it all up front. Because what we're doing with software is complex, right? There's more that we don't know than what we do know about what people are asking for in the first place, as well as how to deliver it. And when those two axes are complex.
Hang on, Richard. Isn't the job of the enterprise architect to anticipate all of those things?
Yes. And not just anticipate, but perfect.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, up front in a document that he's paid for, and then he leaves and gives it to a team.
To draw upon all of his experience building precisely what has been asked for. Mm-hmm. So it's just a repetition, and he should be able to churn it out in 5 minutes because he's already done it.
So that's that's the misperception, right? That's what people think they can actually do.
And in 20 years on, it's still that way. There are still people that think that they can upfront that kind of stuff, and you can't. It's too complex. Sorry.
And if you can, then you're working on tiny little projects that don't matter.
Right. You're not working in a complex space. It's kind of by definition. You need an empirical approach to try something and see how bad you sucked at it to make a small change to it. Otherwise, you're not complex. That's just kind of the way it is.
So Agile is the way to suck less iteratively.
Yes.
Now, as a trainer / professional / Richard, what is when a development team like Darren and I we're an agile team? What is it most likely we're actually not that makes us not agile? What's the misconception that most developers or development teams have, that they think they're agile, but then you are like, well, you realize you're doing this?
Easy one. Just standing up for 15 minutes or less a day does not make you agile. Okay. Most people think they're doing the stand up.
Makes you flexible.
Makes you hit your move goal.
Oh, so that's what they think. So every morning we get together, we talk about what we're working on. That's not enough to be agile.
And even if fun, and I've sat through several teams, I call them daily scrums. You can stand if you want to, but it's not required. Do you guys know why you stand at a daily scrum?
So that you are not there long and you get tired and you want to leave?
Exactly. So
yes! That's why we're agile, man. We know all the answers.
And I would recommend the daily plank. Stand up.
We're standing, we're short.
That's it. So if you listen to the conversation at these daily scrums, oftentimes people are just talking to themselves. Well, today I'm going to, and yesterday I did this. And it's not a team thing, it's a bunch of individuals. So you can learn a lot if you actually listen to a daily scrum. If they're all facing a board and they're updating their tickets or their cards, that's not good either. You want them as a team coming up with a plan for the next 24 hours to meet their goal for that sprint. And very few teams do that.
Well, I don't know that I understand. Let's pretend that the three of us are on a team, and now it's your turn in the stand-up. You take turns, right? I mean, that part is at least right. Now it's Richard's turn. What would Richard? How would a good team-oriented stand-up contribution sound?
Well, it doesn't necessarily sound like the three questions that everyone knows. What did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? And what's in my way or what's blocking me? That's just an example. The goal of a daily scrum is to come up with a plan as a team for the next 24 hours to reach the sprint goal or to reach the completion of the items in the sprint backlog. So if we pulled in half a dozen user stories, those user stories are shredded out into 10 to 15 tasks or failing tests each. Our inclination is I will take this story and do all the work on it, but then we're not working as a team. I'm working on that story and you're working on this story. We want to kind of swarm on work as much as possible. Yeah. So that way we really do dovetail with each other's skill sets and we can cover each other and people get stuck. They can ask for help a little easier when we're all in the same context. So a daily scrum where we're all talking about a plan for working on those user stories, or in Scrum we call them product backlog items. They can be user stories or whatever. That's what we want. We want swarming discussion around work as a team, not a bunch of individuals saying what they're doing that day and nobody else in the circle cares.
Now, when maybe part of the mistake is earlier when I'm accepting tasks that build out the work log for an individual sprint. What do people do there that is wrong?
I'd have to see what their work looks like. But essentially, and I'm a Scrum guy, so I'm going to speak in terms of Scrum nouns and verbs
Good.
here,
I want you to.
because you don't do Agile, you be Agile, and you do Scrum to get there. That's kind of my mantra. So the product owner is the role in Scrum who decides what work in the product backlog is going to maximize the value in the product, the software, the increment. It's called a lot of different things. And they order the backlog. So I think that this high ROI thing should be first, this medium ROI thing should be second, this like low ROI thing, but yet we go to jail if we don't, have our compliance, should be third. The product owner's job is to order those things. When it comes to sprint planning, it's the dev team that actually looks at those ordered items in the backlog and pulls them into the sprint. That's called the forecast. So the product owner doesn't push work. The development team, that's the 3 to 9 people that are actually doing the work, the technical folks, pull those items in. And they should pull those items in as a team. As a team, with the next 2 weeks, knowing our capacity is X because of vacations and holidays and training and whatever, we think we can get those items done. Then they can break them up into tasks or test cases, or they don't have to. There's nothing in Scrum that says you have to break things down into tasks. You just have to have a plan for delivering that work.
Well, that's interesting. Now, as my team starts to accept what's going to happen what's the average sprint these days? Is a week too short?
It's 2 weeks because people want to use the term fortnight, but now that's really popular, so it's not a big deal. Right?
Aaron uses that term all the time.
Uh-huh.
Like fortnight is his natural vernacular.
Is he dancing
he
when he
uses
says
it not
fortnight?
in terms of video games or Scrum. He just uses the word.
I'm just educated.
He just said that's his word for coffee. So so now I've set up my fortnight sprint. Oh, that's kind of cool, actually.
It's very cool.
Yeah, I kind of like it.
See, English is infectious.
Wait a minute. I've got my team. We've all agreed what we can accomplish, what we think we can accomplish, but I haven't necessarily accepted tasks for me to complete. I've accepted tasks that we will complete. That's the gist, right? Where I'm not really assigning Richard all these tasks. You may take responsibility, but in the end, it's all of us that are going to accomplish this entire bucket of tasks.
Yes, and I want to preface this with it's a journey. If I were to walk into a large dysfunctional waterfall company, and I've met a few of those, and take a bunch of people, put them together and say, you're now a team, and I want you to work in a swarming way, they're gonna take hostages. They're not going to do that. But the end goal is that cross-functional team has all the skills to do the work. So there's people on there that can code, that can test, that can design databases, do technical writing, whatever it takes, whatever that product requires, the doers are on that team. And that includes ops too. I'm going to throw some DevOps love in here. To me, a cross-functional Scrum team has always included somebody who understands ops, and maybe not just understood, PowerShell and the deployment environments, but has the password too. That's always these key things with these organizations is we can do our own PowerShell and SQL, but we don't have the password. Therefore, we need this other group and this delay in handoff because they have the password and the trust. That's a killer. We got to fix that.
Now, that's a pretty big wall to crack for a lot of companies because they are not built to spread around the passwords.
Yeah, traditionally, it's very much that Chinese wall between the teams. You throw something across, it might land somewhere close to somebody who picks it up and does something with it. Then they throw back, say that didn't work or whatever. A lot of barriers to communication. And of course, those are the keys to the castle. They don't want those to get out and so on. So there's a lack of trust boundary as well.
Mm-hmm. What's the solution for that? What's the easy first step to get towards that? Build out a QA environment in Azure or something like, you know what I mean? I mean, something like that.
Well, and that's, in my opinion, that's where the DevOps movement came from, is that wall is not going to be brought down just through professional Scrum people like myself saying you should break the wall down. There needs to be good tooling that both sides can understand, and there's some kind of mutual understanding, and we can really visualize and audit what's going on there. And then I think any kind of a retrospective, whether you're doing Scrum or not, and how often you do them is up to the team, but hey, gosh, the tools are great, but if we had an ops person over here, we could deploy so many days faster because we get on the same cadence. And then hopefully the managers start to say, yeah, we could shorten our, cycle time down to a half if we could bridge those teams. And you just do it through numbers and discussions around waste.
Talk to me about when I communicate a user story. So let's call them user stories. I know that you're flexible to call anything, but let's just call them user stories for now. When I structure out a user story, how do you do it? Like what does a user story look and feel like to you, or sound like? Maybe it's a better.
Well, it's a great question. That's a whole episode right there. But a user story should be short and
we're out of time.
So
sorry, go ahead. I'm just.
Oh, man, I should know what I was getting into with you guys. User story should be short and basically a token for a future conversation with a real person. So if another group of users in the organization that's using my app wants to have two-factor authentication because they're getting a lot of security problems, they would maybe not write the user story up as I want two-factor authentication. It would be more of a, hey, we're getting a lot of vulnerabilities. We're getting a lot of people that shouldn't be accessing it. Solve that problem. So then the product owner can say, yeah, I'm feeling that seems to be pretty high value to me. I'm going to put that up here in the backlog. And then when it comes time to actually maybe go and plan that sprint or even execute the work in the sprint, we go talk to Chuck, and Chuck discusses exactly what they're looking for. So I like user stories not to be large documents or specifications,
Richard,
just placeholders. I don't know Chuck.
Trust Chuck with that. Wait, it sounds like it's the stakeholder who is writing the user story.
It should be. They're called user stories.
I'm a user. Thank you very much.
Yes.
A waterfall user. I just mean you. So the development team. How do we break that down? Where does the word multi-factor authentication show up?
Well, one of the things I was going to point out there is one of the traps that I've seen with a lot of companies is they mistake the user story for the detailed specification.
Right.
And they try and throw a whole bunch of implementation specifics into a user story, whereas instead the user story is supposed to spur that discovery. Yep. And there's also this whole thing where they try and turn around and say, okay, say for example, it is, we need to address the problem that we have an insecure logon capability. And then, okay, now we've got to get this done in this sprint.
Yeah.
It's like, but that could be a journey. You've got to speak with so many different people. What is our tooling of choice, blah, 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 blah. You don't know the scope of it and how big it is until you've started to engage with all of those other things. So there's also that trap that somebody turns around and says, okay, we need to fix our login problem. How long is it going to take you devs to build it? Because we need to plan that right now. And I need your commitment to getting this done.
That's a pickle. That's a real pickle.
It is. A good way to keep it separated in your mind is the product backlog, full of product backlog items, call them user stories, should only get into the what. What do they want? What does the stakeholder want? The how is completely up to the development team. Then the earlier they start to provide ideas around the how, the more waste there could be, the more they get locked into that as the solution. So we have a term in professional Scrum called late as responsible. So you want the development team to be as late as responsible to provide the how for that. So if we say 6 months out, our how is going to be hand coding in C++, this multi-factor 3-sprint $75,000 solution, but then we're busy for the next 3 or 4 months. If we can wait until more of the time that it's at the top of the backlog when the product owner wants it, guess what? Someone just put the source code on GitHub, we pull it down, we tweak it, we're good to go. It was less than a sprint.
I see. That's why you want to wait as long as possible, because even if it's just a simple 2 months away, waiting 2 months, who knows what's going to happen in those 2 months, or what you'll find out from the other sprints.
Well, you're falling back into the big upfront design trap again.
Exactly.
You're trying to do all of it before you're actually getting close to the problem.
Now 2 months is a waterfall? Dang it. Okay, I'm following 100%.
But it does add additional complexities, doesn't it? Because for people, certainly organizations, perhaps customers, if you're working in more of a consulting world, there's a lack of predictability to the medium long-term duration of the activities that they're committing to.
That's right. I'm writing a check to Darren to do this. He's got to tell me how much this is going to cost. Right. I'm like, I can't keep writing checks. Yeah. And now that is a hard world, especially in the consulting world, because you do want to give some sort of cost estimate, I think. I mean, I know, because as a consumer or the one writing the check, I demand it, right, one way or another. Now, I'm not saying fixed bid. I realize that's a totally different conversation.
It is.
How do you handle estimates?
Well, and you mentioned the contract for hire companies that are doing dev for other stakeholders. That's a whole other box of tarantulas that you can get into or not. Let me talk about private internal dev organizations, in which case estimates are just what they need based on the level of trust they have with the organization. If they're just starting out, you might need to give them pretty strict roadmaps because they're coming from having been really burned by 40 years of waterfall development. And now we're going to go, we've invested all this training and, the tooling for this Scrum journey now, we're really suspicious. So keep giving us those upfront, wasteful things. They're all lies anyway, but they feel better if there's a lie on paper with a signature somewhere. And then let the proof, be in the value that's being delivered. So 6 months in, 1 year in, you've got, 26 sprints under your belt. Look back at the value that was delivered and care more about that than if the estimates were hit or not, or what the velocity was, or these quasi-agile metrics, which are still kind of wasteful, and people get all, sick with tracking them down and trying to compare across teams their velocities and things like that. That doesn't mean anything. Now, if you're a dev shop that's working for, a customer that doesn't know you from anybody, there's still a bit of that contract stuff you have to do. I try to if there's some credibility there, and I really like these organizations to double down that, hey, we are using Scrum. We've got 5 years of sprints. Here's all of our other customers. You can reach out as references. But rather than buy product, features from us, buy sprints from us. So you've got a budget of $100,000. We think that'll buy 5 sprints. That means we're pretty much done by the end of August or whatever. So we're going to have a tight relationship with you to make sure that we give you the most high-valued work in those 5 sprints. You've got to share the risk with the customer.
That's a way of measuring. Yeah, exactly.
That's the way I've executed a lot of the things with my company when we're doing custom development. Is there's normally a commitment to X number of sprints with an ongoing per sprint fee that's kind of negotiated, and there you collaborate to prioritize that product backlog, to plan, and that's where the communication that you're emphasizing is so key, because you have to be able to know very quickly whether some feature is dramatically more difficult than was appreciated at the early part of the high level planning. And that's where, to me, Agile is so powerful, is you're not stuck 9 months into a 10-month hard and fast delivery schedule when you realize, oh, this doesn't work the way we thought it did.
Exactly.
You can still deliver your 5 sprints.
Yeah.
Okay, I follow, of course. Let's see. Another problem, another heartache with Agile that a lot of developers feel is, where is the centralized architecture gardened? Like, how do you maintain a consistent architecture across multiple things when everything is a free-for-all in every team?
And nobody documents anything.
And it's all documented with just unit tests, right? Exactly.
Oh yeah, this is the classic. Scrum is only for cowboys, right? We're just cowboy coding, and we're just creating design on the fly.
Yeah,
I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I think that, and Darren, you've mentioned this a couple times, that having the big upfront design is more often than not waste. How do you know? How do we know that we need a scalable, multi-region architecture that will fail over instantaneously? We haven't even given this to the first user yet. So us spending months on this upfront architecture and all this research, and then $500,000 is gone before we write the first line of code, and we give it to the users and they say, this isn't what we want. And then at that point, you have to say, this is what you get. We've got $500,000 sunk into this. Sorry. So it's better to just give them something fit for purpose sprint 1, and then let the architecture, follow where the stakeholders want the app to go. Now, can you make wrong decisions? Yes. You could choose an architecture that, now that we're 5 sprints in, they want this thing to be scalable and support 100 transactions a second. We need to rethink some things. But going in, you didn't know that. And the risk of not delivering outweighs the risk of you not guessing 5 sprints in what they would want.
Now, let me ask you. Go ahead. Let me ask you about. No, Richard, I could tell you had something really good to add. Go ahead. I won't forget.
So organizations are still going to have their their constraints, their standards, their policies. Like, hey, we build on top of core. We only use C#. SQL Server 2019 is our version. We're SQL Azure, Cosmos. You're going to have those constraints to play within, but to have somebody or some team outside the development team making the how decisions is just a recipe for disaster. Do we want architects on the dev team? Yes. But I can guarantee that sprint after sprint, there's not much architecture work for them. So they better be a coder first and an architect second, because we can't just keep them busy with, UML diagrams for sprint after sprint, if that makes sense.
Now, that's not to say that you're not going to leverage best practices and implement existing enterprise patterns where it makes sense to do so.
That's correct. And I got to call you on best practices. That's one of the worst terms ever.
Let's call them better practices.
Yes, proven practices, preferred practices, because best indicates a point in time,
exactly.
And it also tells people, oh, I've arrived, I can stop looking.
Yeah, this is the one way.
Yeah. Well, Darren said it, so
yeah.
I mean,
Silverlight.
I would say imperious.
English is so hard. All right, I understand. So where's the architecture belong in an agile world? Partly you're saying the architecture is evolving over time. I think that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, though. Don't you find that some developers, they can't quite, like, I don't mind the individual method names and the classes and which interfaces we use and things like that, kind of figuring out as we get there. Isn't there a big picture sprint zero?
So I'll just say that agility makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but it works. And no, there's not a sprint zero.
I've been on a lot of sprint zeros.
but that's where I use that tongue-in-cheek phrase "scrumiful," because that's where you have a lot of people and a lot of organizations that say we're going to be agile and they say we're going to embrace these things, and then they're going to turn around and say, well, in sprint zero we're going to decide how we're going to build it, and we need to ship this in October, so we're only going to have 10 sprints, and everything in the backlog needs to be built, but we're agile,
right?
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes
we're going to use a Kanban board for the whole thing.
Yeah. And that's scrumiful.
Yes. And stand up for 15 minutes a day.
It's exactly the same.
Now,
approach.
you might see that, though, because you're an open-minded guy, Richard. I can tell. That's me leading into you agreeing with what I say. But okay. There are baby steps, right? I mean, an organization may not be able to stomach an entire adoption of a new process yet, but there are baby steps they can take.
Well, the good news is very few teams are working on greenfield apps, so a lot of those bad architectural decisions are already there. They're working on legacy apps, are trying to be more agile about it. So that's the good news, Jerry. There's already a bunch of crap architecture out there teams have to deal with.
I can sleep well tonight. And they're all in your credit card company is what you really don't know.
Yeah.
Yes. I could name some names, but I won't.
That's the worst, isn't it? It's that we all know it.
Yeah.
Okay, so sometimes the problem is around where to start. Sometimes the problem is around architecture. Sometimes solve this problem for me. I have a user story that, let's just say it's multi-factor authentication. That's a pretty great example.
Okay.
And it's going to take 4 weeks. It just takes 4 weeks to get all of this in place. There's a lot of things to get working. Let's just pretend. Okay. How do you handle multi-sprint user stories?
I'd say let's give it 8 weeks to make sure it really works well. No. So that's the problem is who came up with the 4 weeks? I mean, if it's like this is really big and really, really awkward and, a lot of moving parts, we have to have a lot of testing, and well, then let's just call it 8 weeks. I mean, why put it at 4 weeks? Let's make a really good multi-factor authentication feature and just call it 3 months.
Okay. Yeah, I got it.
So
how do we stay in our fortnights?
Yes. So that was me being a little obnoxious about why not just make it 8 weeks, right?
Yeah, I follow you.
If we adopt this new way of working, we say we've got a team of 5 people. Okay, we've got 2 coders, someone really good at test, an architect / ops person, and a technical writer, content / make it pretty person. We got a good, well-rounded 5-people team. You always have to have the make it pretty person on the team because coders necessarily can't do that. Jerry, you make it pretty. Yeah, you were like a.
I'm that guy.
Yeah.
You're a XAML guy.
By the way, they love it if you say you're the make it pretty person.
Hey, are you the make it pretty person? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, we got 5 people. We got 2 weeks. If honestly the only thing we can get done in that 2 weeks is one feature, just do the math. So we're looking at 40, 80 times 5. Even at halftime, take half of that for productivity time. That's a couple hundred hours of dedicated work on a team that's got just one thing to solve.
Yeah.
When I put it out to teams, they're like, that makes a lot of sense. But we're special snowflakes here at company XYZ. We have to also be looking after this system. We've got this incidents that come in. We've got to also be da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's always a matter of focus. One of the values, Scrum values, is focus. You've got to be able to focus. People that say the Scrum Master is the one who removes the impediments, the one that runs the meetings. No. To me, if you had to sum up what the Scrum Master does, it's to protect the focus of the team. Keep all the other crap out of their days so that they can get MFA done in 2 weeks, for example. Now, given that, if it's still going to take 4 weeks, Jerry, is it still going to take 4 weeks? Even with focus, right?
What if?
All right, still going to take 4 weeks. You've got to slice it. You've got to slice it, and you slice it vertically so that you can get something done that not just demos in the end of sprint 1, but actually has value. Then second part of that, you can, in second sprint, you can finish up that feature by doing the second slice of it. So you'd actually take that PBI that's like, a size 34 story point, or whatever rating system you're using, and say, our best sprint ever was like 18 story points velocity. So we're going to split that 34 into 2 pieces or 3 pieces, so that we know we can do them in a sprint.
So this is a muscle memory that you just have to develop, the ability to cut things into the right size so that your team can actually work on them without breaking everything you're trying to do.
Yes.
Well, also, so you've got something that you can say you've completed in that sprint. Right. Because that's the key thing. If you turn around and say this is 8 weeks, you're not following any sort of agile methodology if at the end of your sprint, you've got nothing you can demonstrate.
Yeah, that's right.
That's it.
Okay. Let me pause here for a second and ask you about tooling. So one of the things that makes this easier, honestly, for a lot of teams is they adopt a tool that sort of not enforces, but just kind of drives them towards this type of process.
That's right.
And I know you know a lot about Azure DevOps, right? ADO. And talk to me a little bit about how Azure DevOps helps an Agile team.
Absolutely. So before that, though, I would say it's the development team's choice on what tools they want or want not to use. Organizations that push down, you will use this tool, you will use project, you will use whatever.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the development team has to be self-organized in how they work, and that includes all the tools as well. So if they want, I'm a big fan of physical boards. So if they want to get some, blue painter's tape and make a big board on the wall and use the Post-it notes, more power to them. Because they can actually go there, they pull a sticky down, they can have a conversation. The problem is that the cleaning guy can come along at night, and there goes your board. Or
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Remote people,
or just Chuck down the hall starts rearranging cart. Yeah.
Chuck just goes in and takes all of his stories off there to go back and improve them, and it's like, where'd our work go? Yes, exactly.
He hates our team.
Agile.
We took his budget. I'll show you Agile. So, all right, keep going with tooling, because I think this is really valuable. You can do it physically, but that doesn't drive the process quite as well as some of the tools that you've probably seen.
No, correct. And I usually just, Azure DevOps has 5 services. When I'm talking about Scrum and getting to an agility, pretty much I'm talking at first just about Azure boards. So the visualization of work, being able to plan your work, forecast your work, execute your work on a daily basis. So I'm talking about there the product backlog, the boards, and the sprints themselves. Obviously, agility extends all the way through to production and then monitoring it and getting that feedback from incidents and from the user telemetry, the whole DevOps cycle, and that includes all the other services as well. But mostly when I'm talking with teams on Scrum, I'm talking mostly about Azure boards there. And I will tell you that the tools today have evolved to where they are the best in class. I've used the other competitor tools. I've used the Rallies. I've used the version 1s. I've used the Jiras. And Azure boards.
Those are all the top ones right there.
Those are the top ones. Even Trello. Trello's hard to beat because it's free, but it's not meant to implement a Scrum. It's meant to just have a task list that you can have other users help with. So it's kind of hokey to do it that way. Yeah, the tools today are at a state where they're the best of them out there. I mean, they may not have that one feature that you were used to over on this system, but I would say that maybe your team should rethink that feature. Sometimes there's these, click a button and it will go ahead and forecast your sprints for you and pre-bucket the work into future sprints. I think that's stupid. How do you know what the sprint review on this sprint's going to come? It might be some high priority work that comes in. We have to drag that up and then we have to, reforecast that.
Yeah.
So
the forecasting, there's the problem. That's what we don't have is forecasting. All right, talk to me about this. We have Azure ADO, we have ADO, Azure DevOps. We have Azure DevOps.
Correct.
And not to be confused with Visual Studio Online.
No.
Which was that was not to be confused with Visual Studio Team Services.
Which was not to be confused with Visual Studio Team System.
Man, we nail it with names, though.
Or Source Safe.
Source Safe. There's no Kanban board in Source Safe. That part's for sure.
That's true.
Okay, so I have all these different toolings. Where do you even start? So it's $7 to use ADO. That's a pretty nice place to start, but that doesn't tell me how to start. What do you tell a team who's like, hey, we're ready? Tell us a little bit about the tooling.
Sure. So you can go out and sign up for an Azure DevOps organization for free, 5 users, basic license. And, if you've got a team of 5, you can have private repos, you can have your boards, you can go to town, whether you're doing, professional development or open source or whatever. Teams that are larger than 5 or multiple teams.
Wait, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
ADO's free for teams of 5?
Yeah.
Wow.
Basic licenses, yeah.
It's been since day one. Yeah.
Well, thanks for rubbing that in.
No problem.
Microsoft see,
I work on big teams, and everything's free for me. That's right.
That's true.
Sorry.
Get out in the real world a bit.
Okay, so that's a great place to start, especially for a smaller team.
It is. I mean, and it gets better because if your 6th and 7th person that you add on have Visual Studio subscriptions, they're free also. If your 8th and 9th and 10th person add on are stakeholders and they just want to look at work items and edit work items, they're free also. Maybe you start to have to adding additional basic licenses or the testing licenses if you're going to start doing some of the test case management. But no, the pricing is great. If you're just talking about Azure boards and planning and tracking your work and visualizing things, it's very reasonable, definitely.
And configurable. Man, those work items can be anything. Boy almighty.
Very
internally, let me tell you a secret about Microsoft internally. We add about 1 billion fields per work item. Like it takes a long time just to scroll, and then when you think you've scrolled to the bottom, that's when you realize there's 6 more tabs they've added. So it's really nice. It's really
ultimately discoverable.
Yes.
So what's your favorite Scrum book?
Well, the Scrum Guide. It's free downloads, PDF. It's like 17 pages. It's in 30 different languages, and it is the official rules of Scrum. Ken and Jeff, the co-creators of Scrum, put the guide together.
17 pages, the tiniest font.
It's small. There's not much in there. It doesn't tell you how to work. That's the thing. It's a framework. It's not a prescriptive methodology or a process.
It's not telling you how to code. It's not telling you how to design. It's telling you how to organize.
I see.
But that's also the funny thing is, I mean, how many times have you come across organizations that have a dogmatic approach to Agile, which is an oxymoron?
That's right. Like, I mean, there's a reason people hate Agile people. Like, I mean, that jerk he's always the one saying, "That's not Agile." You're like,
yes.
Go get a sandwich.
And I don't know
what you say.
Go get a sandwich.
I'm sorry.
Exactly my phrase.
I should have controlled myself. I'm sorry.
Well, I try not to be that's not in the Scrum Guide guy, but sometimes people will say the stupidest things like, we looked at Scrum, but we just don't like planning poker because some of us are just dead set against gambling. So we couldn't do Scrum. I'm like, planning poker is not part of Scrum. It's a real popular practice that Scrum teams use, but it's not part of Scrum at all. So people need to familiarize yourself with what is and is not Scrum because it's very, very narrow. What is Scrum? And it's a framework in which you can try hundreds of experiments.
Darren, you're against gambling, I remember.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm against losing money.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Therefore, I'm against gambling.
I am totally for a sure thing. And there are so many of those, man. I'm telling
you.
Yeah, so,
that's why we're both still here recording this video.
Darren, let me ask you a question then. Did you bet on Silverlight?
Oh my gosh.
Now I'm going to scratch your eyes out.
Sorry.
You're breaking up. You're breaking up.
We'll have to edit this out. Sorry.
Richard, talk to us about training. Talk to us about the real world, how you could take a team and make them better. They look at a 17-page book and they're like, there's no way I will ever read that.
No. So organizations, first of all, have to want to change. Okay, this is one of the hardest things they're ever going to do. It's like, hey, I want to look like the people on TV. I'm going to go to the gym and just, jump into a diet and exercise routine for the rest of my life. No, that's not a good motivator. You need the doctor to be telling you you're dead in 6 months, because of your levels and your pressures and everything. And now you're motivated. So I like organizations that are not governments, that are not, so large that they can't fail. I like companies that have competitors, that have reasons to improve, that they want, they're out of business or their competitors will eat their lunch if they don't change in 6 months. There's the motivation, because it is an obnoxious, set of changes they're about to do. Now, if they're good with that, if I kind of do the pre-call and say, I think you might be ripe for change, then we'll talk about Scrum training, and that can be as simple as a 2-day professional Scrum foundations class where we go in and we take everybody, technical people, candidates to be product owner, candidates to be stakeholders, candidates to be Scrum masters. We put in a class and they get to experience that Scrum guide, that free PDF over a period of 2 days with some additional practices, and they actually do sprints. And they actually see, the squeeze of the time box, and that their eyes are way too big for their plates and things like that. And that sometimes is enough. There needs to be some people.
Can really change people, huh?
Oh yeah. I tell you a story. There was a college here that I did 3-day professional Scrum developer training. So it's like the 2-day class, but with Visual Studio tooling and Azure DevOps, and we also talk about the different technical excellence aspects. Pair programming and test first and refactoring. After class, they went back to management and said, if you don't let us start working like this, we're going to quit. And I'm like,
if I had a quarter for every time I've said that to my management.
Well, that explains how many jobs
you know what? That goes to show how compelling it can be to a developer, and because we know how frustrating the treadmill of software development can be as well. Because you work and you dedicate and the weekends are gone, you give up that holiday, and then the project's thrown away because it's so far behind. And so I totally understand why this can be appealing to developers. And so what's the name of your training company?
Accentient is my company, and I deliver both Scrum.org training. So that's the official organization back in Boston. Ken Schwaber heads that, and there's a lot of different training, not just the foundations class, but also developer, product owner, Scrum Master, and then some other ones. But then I also have my own set of Azure DevOps classes, a 1-day class on boards, a 1-day class on repos, a 1-day class on test plans, and then a 2-day class on continuous delivery.
Think about how nice that would be for a team that's already decided to go Azure DevOps, and then what they realize is, I don't think we're doing it right. Like, we were trying. It would sure be cool if we could have somebody like Richard just show us how it's really meant to be, so that we can get the most out of the tool, because the reality is the tool is tuned to give you the most value when you use it properly. That's just the way it goes. That's just the way it goes. Yep. Well, we'll make sure a link to what'd you say it was called?
Accentient. It's ACC. No, it's like the word accent and then IENT at the end.
It's Accentient. And we'll make sure a link to Accentient.com is available here. Richard, I got to say, we could talk for a long time on Scrum and the difficulties and and also the glories of Scrum. Absolutely. And the reason people love Agile development in the end and hate it at the beginning and suffer in the middle. And and in the end, that they love it. It's one of those weird sort of things. And then Project 2 comes along, and they wouldn't do it any other way. That's just kind of the way it goes. All right. So if you're a developer watching the show and you are currently a waterfall developer, we understand. That's just the way many parts of the world really are. If though you're trying to adapt and adopt Agile technologies and Agile methodologies into your project, why not use some tooling that makes it easy? Why not use some training to show you how? We've talked about it for an hour. There's no reason not to. It's absolutely fantastic.
Do it.
And I've got Darren, who everybody trusts, because listen to his accent.
Do it now.
And he says it's great. All right. Richard, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Jerry.